Hey everybody, welcome to Mind Melt Podcast, and today I am so excited about this episode. Um, I've got my friend Amber Richard, who is a physical therapist, but she does it from a different point of view. It's really amazing how the approach that she takes. She focuses on the brain and the body connection, which I think is lost in Western culture, and I think you're going to find that our conversation really highlights a lot of the issues in our current medical field and just kind of the direction that we should move towards. And so if you have enjoyed people like Chris Kresser or Dr. Rhonda Patrick or any of, these nuanced doctors, you're going to really enjoy Amber. She's extremely intelligent, someone who's inspired me a lot in the past. So to be able to sit down and talk to her for an hour was truly an honor. I think that you're going to enjoy this episode. Also, I just wanted to let you know that I'm a little bit late on releasing this just because I have been working like crazy, and her and I had several days where we were planning on recording this, but it just kind of got pushed back because of me. So I hope that you enjoy this. It's long overdue. And I bring you Amber Richard. Thanks. Okay, I am here with Amber. And Amber, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you do for a living and what got you into it?
So I am a doctor of physical therapy and I work in outpatient orthopedics. So that means I work in a clinic basically seeing people who are usually out of surgery or who have had some injuries to like the musculoskeletal system. So that means like broken bones, sprains, strains. Sometimes we see other things, but mostly it's just people recovering from an injury, and I just help them through that recovery process. And my background is in dance. I was a ballet dancer for 20 years and did a lot of other types of dance after that. And then I was a dance major in undergrad, and that's how I kind of got tuned into the field of physical therapy. And then basically after a few years of practice, I started developing chronic neck pain. And when I developed chronic pain is when I started researching pain to understand what was happening. And it kind of opened this Pandora's box of like, oh my gosh, this all makes sense. I've been seeing this for a few years of practice with people, but I didn't have the science to sort of back it up. And it's just kind of become a new passion and just been absolutely fascinating to me because it's the bridge between the brain and the body, basically. And right now there's a lot of misunderstandings in our culture and society about pain, and it's leading to a lot of problems in our country. So I'm trying to do my part in terms of trying to re-educate people around the topic of pain and understanding it better so that you can find your way out of pain if you're in pain, and you can have better sort of coping strategies.
So I actually didn't know that you were into ballet for
Mm-hmm.
that long. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And just for the listeners, I wanted to say that you're like one of my friends' soon-to-be wife, right? When are you
Yeah.
guys getting married?
We're getting married in November.
Yeah, and Will has been on my other podcast, Top Tier Underground, and his artist name is Elevated Mind. He's a music producer, but I've gotten to meet you over the years, which has been awesome, and both of you guys are just super great people. So it's really cool to see you guys pursuing scientifically minded careers.
Well, right back at you with all of your, diving into all kinds of topics and Kendra. And it's always fun to see you guys and have discussions.
Yeah. So, what do you think, like, I want to get into kind of, the neurobiology of pain and stuff like that. But before we do, what do you think has led our Western culture in the wrong direction as far as not just pain, but I mean, agriculture, food, mind, body connection? Like, it seems like we really are off the path here as far as
Yeah.
healthcare goes. And it's really weird because you think that as far as incentivized like health goes, you think it'd be more of an incentive for insurance companies to have people geared towards proper health rather than this like post care, where
Yeah.
everybody's taking care of things after the fact, after everything
Right.
happened.
Yeah, in the medical system, we often will say it's not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system. We wait
Yeah.
for people to get sick and then we do something about it when really prevention is much more effective and would save a lot of people from a lot of suffering.
And
Um,
taxpayer dollars. I mean, even from a
right.
financial incentive, it's just insane that I just think that the amount of like diabetes, there's like, what is it, 30% of people are predisposed?
I
And
don't know that percentage, but I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's like 30% of Americans are predisposed at, like they're going to get it. It's not even like they could get it, but they're like in the beginning stages of getting it. And it's,
Yeah.
you know, and I just, you'd think that that we would go after teaching people the proper nutrition, but so,
Yeah.
so what do you think it is though? That,
I think it's a mixture of things. I mean, I think the first is that we have a pharmaceutical industry that has a lot of influence over the medical industry.
mhm,
And pharmaceuticals make money off of selling new things, whether they're pills or injections or whatever it may be. And it's not, I think I'm going to start everything by saying that like it's such a human tendency to see things as being black and white, and it's just not. There's always gray. So there's some wonderful things that have come out of the pharmaceutical industries and life-saving drugs.
mhm,
But on the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of drugs that have been marketed to specific diseases and illnesses and issues that maybe don't actually help or potentially make things worse. And that's kind of what has happened with pain,
yeah,
because they came up with some really strong painkillers that happen to be highly addictive. And so we were sold the idea that you should be pain free all the time. That's basically, in Western society at least, if you are in pain, something's wrong. It's
right.
made as if like something's wrong with you if you have pain, and therefore if you have pain, you need to do something about it. And here, let me package this beautiful pill that you can take that'll make it all go away without you having to think about what's going on.
Hmm.
Right. So it's much more, it's very attractive. Like just get rid of the pain. You just take an Advil, boom, it's gone. You don't have to think whether maybe you're dehydrated and you should drink some water, or you didn't get
Yeah,
enough sleep, or whatever
yeah.
it may be. So it's a lot of masking symptoms rather than addressing the root cause.
That's a good
Uh,
point. That's a good distinction to be made about the black and white thing, because people want it to either, like when you talk about, I mean, and I'm sure you see it with our friend group a lot, when you talk about pharmaceuticals or like, let's do a really crazy one right now, vaccines. It's like people are talking about vaccines like crazy right now.
mhm.
And it's not just it it has to be either they're bad or they're good. It can't be like they're probably a net benefit, but there could be negative things too, right? I mean,
Right. It takes a lot of nuance to be willing to see like, oh, things are gray, things are not black and white. Everything in life is that way, but I don't think our brains are developed enough to do that unless you really, build some skills around not um, falling into that thinking pattern of just seeing things as black and white, and just kind of cultivating an attitude of skepticism, and just looking at everything with equal amount of skepticism is really hard to do.
mhm.
So it's just kind of it's a challenging issue for the human brain, I think. But I agree with you as far as vaccines are concerned. I think that's a much more sort of well-rounded, balanced approach to looking at this issue.
I know it's so
um,
funny when you see these arguments going on social media, because it's like, you guys, if you guys are both adamant about this, maybe there's somewhere in the middle that we should talk,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
And then back to what I was saying about, like that we've been sold the idea that we should be pain free all the time. And frankly, that's just not realistic. Like we're living up to 100 years at a time on planet Earth. Like we outlive our bodies really. Like things are gonna break down. Sometimes something's gonna hurt. Like you're gonna have an ache, you're gonna have a pain, you're gonna have something that happens. And we're sort of like surprised and shocked when it happens. And we go, oh my God, my body's betraying me. How could it do this? And we get angry. And if we can't just take a pill to make it go away like that, we panic basically, And I think if we were taught from the beginning that pain is a part of life,
yeah,
and how to manage that, how to
yeah,
deal with it when it comes up, how to minimize it as much as possible, that would be a way healthier way of approaching pain than this, like, on and off, black and white. Something's wrong with you if you feel pain and you should get rid of it immediately. I don't think that's good. And as talking about the opiate epidemic, there's kind of a two-way problem. There's a supply problem in that, physicians were misled in terms of the addictive nature of the drugs, and they were told to prescribe it to people with chronic pain, which is the worst person you could give that to because they're
mhm,
never going to get off of them. Um, And then
Yeah.
so they were overprescribed, and there's a ton of them out there, and they're still being overprescribed, but it's being pulled back on now. And then there's a demand issue, because culturally we've been told that we shouldn't feel pain, that if we feel pain, we should be given something by our doctor to get rid of it. We want a silver bullet treatment. And so a lot of people go into their doctor's offices asking for these things. And in fact, they feel like they're being neglected if they're told, no, you should just take acetaminophen or, an over the counter, and I'm not going to get prescribed you an opiate. They
Yeah.
will walk away feeling like, my doctor didn't believe me. He thought my pain was no big deal, and he just sent me packing, and they don't realize that that's actually really the right thing to do. But,
Right.
so there's a two-way problem there.
Yeah.
And I do think that in Western society, we see the mind and the body as being two separate things that don't interact. And that's just not how it works.
Yeah. That's a good
And
point.
that's a piece of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't
Yeah.
see
I
the
think
way our mind ties into it.
well, and our mind, like, I mean, pain has to exist for a reason, or else it would have been filtered out by now, right? In biology. So it's like when you think about the benefits of feeling pain, like if you broke your arm and you had no idea that you broke your arm, you would cause a lot of problems for yourself in healing, right?
Right. Right. There are people with congenital insensitivity to pain, and they literally can't tell when their body's being damaged, and
Mhm.
they don't live very long
Yeah.
because their body gets damaged and they can't feel it. They can't
Yeah.
tell what's happening. So they'll, get dehydrated to the point of no return, or all kinds of different things could happen to them if they put their hands on a hot stove top. They can't tell that they're burning. I mean, it's crazy to think that that could be possible, but pain is a protective mechanism, and it's there to keep you alive. And notice, again, back to the black and white, it's not all bad. Pain
Right.
is necessary, and there are some positive aspects to it. It's your body telling you something, giving you some feedback,
Hmm.
that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah. That's super interesting.
It's another downside to just, reaching for a pill, because then you
Yeah.
don't really understand why you had that pain. You haven't done any troubleshooting to figure it out.
Yeah. And like with the opiate epidemic thing, it's kind of like I never really looked at it from for your perspective. I mean, I've always looked at it like, okay, there's obviously people that might need opiates, right? I mean, there's situations where opiates can be effective. There has to,
Totally.
you know,
Absolutely.
but at the same time, if we live in this society that's always like, oh, like I'm in pain, make it better, then uh, everybody's version of pain could be a little different. And what about like emotional pain?
Right.
That is a real thing, right? When you're feeling heartbroken, and that's like a real pain. I mean, it
Hmm.
makes you not want to move, makes you not want to get up, and that's a real pain. And
Hmm.
then, do you cope with that with drugs? I mean, it's like, it's interesting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's going back to the overlap of, the pain has a physical component, but it always has some type of overlay from everything else that's going on in your brain, your emotions, your past experiences, your expectations, your memories. There's so many things that interact with the physical situation in your body to either amplify or to turn the volume down on pain signals. It's really pretty interesting. But yeah, that's a perfect example of, something that's maybe not a sensory damage in your body situation. Emotional pain can still present as a physical sensation in your
Mhm.
body because they're connected.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like when I took Sapolsky's class, there was this thing that I can't remember right now what part of the brain it activated, but it's like when you are disgusted, it's like it activates the same part of the brain that makes you think that you chewed something rotten. So like
Mm,
when you get to the point of a certain level of disgust, like a lot of people when they see someone get murdered in front of them or something,
hmm.
they're so disgusted that they throw up because their body's natural reaction is to get the poison out of their body, but it's like
Right.
acting on the same properties of the brain. It's really,
Hmm.
it's like the mind has this thing where it just is like, oh, well, that's really useful for this, like let's also pair it for this, and
Right.
instead of like inventing new components.
Yeah, I'll say, like, the brain is basically a giant prediction machine. So it associates, something with something else, and so it has these sort of automated reactions based on expectations.
Mm,
So that's kind of that association there of like, the feeling of disgust is associated with having to throw up.
yeah, yeah,
And so anytime you feel disgust, you might have that bodily reaction, which is automated.
yeah.
Yeah.
So What's something that, because I know that you must take kind of a unique approach on this. Obviously you do. So what made you want to take the unique approach to this and like try to get it so that the mind and the body are connected instead of this
Yeah.
disassociation?
Well, I hope it's not unique for much longer. I think it's
Right.
changing very slowly, but the medical system is so set in its ways. It's really hard to change things, and there's so many barriers to it changing, unfortunately. I mean, back to your question earlier, the medical industrial complex makes money off of doing things to people, whether that's injections, surgeries, prescribing them pills, all that, generates revenue for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we use that approach. And also because it's effective at times, right? But there is some percentage of the population from whom that totally doesn't work and actually makes them worse. So trying to tease out who fits in that box versus who needs, an intervention, that's really where we need to make some changes. I've lost track of your previous question though, so tell me again.
That's okay.
Oh, how did I come to this approach?
Well, yeah, just because this approach is kind of unique as of right now, it is.
Yeah. Well, I think that having firsthand experience with chronic pain is where it came from, basically. I ended up with this neck pain that just wouldn't go away, and that was just getting worse and worse, and it was becoming more and more chronic and wouldn't go away forever, and then it wouldn't go away at all. And so I had to look into it. I had to figure out what was going on. And once I learned the neuroscience behind pain, then that's what really made me bridge the gap.
What was your crossing out though over to the neuroscience part of it? Like, did you go and see a pain specialist that started to break it down for you in this way, or did you?
No. So this is really interesting. I like this question because I haven't really necessarily discussed this piece. So for a long time, and me and my coworkers talk about this all the time, we work with people, and basically the people who come in and think they're going to get better, they basically tell you on the first day, they're like, oh, I think this will be fine, right? This won't take too long. Like, they're basically looking for you to tell them that you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
They get better. If they think they're going to get better, they get better. And then we have other people who walk in the door and they're basically telling us on the first day, like, I don't think this is going to get better. And the people with that kind of mindset don't get better. And so it's kind of, we observe it, we see it all the time. We're like, this is so weird. Like, for the same injury, why would two people react so differently? And we can see that there's an overlap between what the person believes and then what the outcome is. Mm-hmm. So I've witnessed it. I've seen it happening for the entire time that I've been practicing. And then what happened is I had a patient who had this, she had plantar fasciitis, which is an irritation of a tissue in your foot. And she was a runner, and she went to her doctor, and her doctor was like, no big deal. We'll just do an injection. We'll put some cortisone in it, which now is not really usually what they do for that. And when they did the injection, they hit a nerve as they were going in. Her nerve became super hypersensitive. Like, she literally could not put weight on her foot. She crawled around her house for a few months. Like, that's how crazy. Intense the pain was. Just from having, damaged that nerve. And when she first came in, she told me her whole story, and I recognized, I was like, she just needs to tell me her story. And so I just sat and I listened, and I just validated what she had to say. And her mindset was super positive. And I was like, all right, we're going to do this. And I worked with her really closely, and we're friends now. And she is actually the one who sent me the very first thing that got me onto the road of, pursuing and learning about the neuroscience of pain. So she sent me this workbook that's put out by Greg Lehman, he's a biomechanist from Canada who does a bunch of research on pain. And so I read his workbook, and I was dealing with my chronic pain at the time. And I was like, oh my God, all of this makes sense. Like, I can't believe this wasn't presented to me in school. Like, how did I not know about this?
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, so clearly in my case, a big piece of why I had chronic pain was the way that my mind was interpreting everything that was happening. Because since I read that document, I have not had a flare-up.
Huh, really?
I've had symptoms, like sometimes it bothers me, sometimes I feel a tweak, whatever. It's fine, it goes away. Like, it's not a big deal. So just me understanding what was happening totally de-threatened it. And then my brain was like, oh yeah, no, it's no big deal. I don't need to produce pain. So that was
This
how I
is
got tuned into it, is basically my patient. And this is the thing that's so interesting. I think like any healthcare provider will probably tell you this, like we learn so much from our patients. Like
yeah.
it's like a total, I mean, certainly we know a lot, and every different type of doctor has a different skill set and a different knowledge base, but we don't know everything,
Yeah.
and there's a lot out there, and a lot of patients are really proactive in researching things and trying to understand what they're going through, because our medical system really doesn't give them time with providers to be able to learn from them. So there's a lot of people trying to take it in their own hands. But in this case, I learned it from a patient,
Yeah.
which is pretty crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. It is crazy though. I mean, like I have Crohn's disease, and when I don't
Mm-hmm.
do medication for it, but it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I like am at the point where I'm not going to take medication no matter what. I mean, I just don't need to do it. I figured it out a way where I can do it through diet. And
Mm-hmm.
but it was like, I mean, 5 or 6 years of really battling with doctors, because they're always like, no, you don't, diet isn't really that important. It's more, it's just a disease. It's just a chronic disease. This is how it's going to be for the rest of your life. You're going to have to do either these biologics, or you're going to have to do this medication. And, if anything, you should just like, stick to grain and whatever, and oatmeal and all, and they say all these
Yeah.
things. And then, I just like come across someone, do you know who Chris Kresser is?
No, I don't.
Oh man, he's like really cool doctor in your area. He's over, I think he's in Berkeley.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
but he's amazing. Just check him out. You will love what he's doing. He's doing like a similar approach as you, except that it's with food. So it's like, like it's not just, it's about like meditation and
Mm-hmm.
just all these different areas of health. And just like reading his book made me take this different approach. And then all of a sudden it was like this veil had been lifted,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see the interconnections of everything, and
Right.
it just makes sense. I think that that's a big piece of it, is like having gone through it firsthand. I mean, I talk about this, that there's this, I call it the gap of experience, which is that no matter how interested you are in a topic or how obsessed you might be about it and all the research that you do about it, you're not going to know it the same way that somebody who has gone through it knows it. And
Right.
so when you experience it firsthand and then you're exposed to the information, the stuff that rings true is just so undeniable. You're like, yeah, this is reality. This is truth. I've felt it, and for myself, basically. So that's, I think, what made it really easy for me to grasp onto the idea that pain is not just a physical thing.
Yeah.
But it's a hard sell if your entire life you've been told that pain is something that happens in your body, and you've had 10 different providers who've told you that there's something wrong in your body. So
So
it's a,
now this kind of presents an interesting like dilemma, because at one point we're saying that pain provides a purpose and it's important for us to recognize that, but also we're saying that or you're saying, I shouldn't say we, but also we're saying like that it's in the brain. So does that mean, like, for listeners, does that mean basically people should just, you can shut it off if you need to, or like
right.
that's
So
probably a common question, right?
definitely. So it goes back to, it's not that black and white, right?
Right. Yeah.
So yes, your brain can shut off pain if it needs to. So the perfect example of this would be, let's say you're crossing the street and you sprain your ankle. Is it going to hurt?
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
right? It hurts when you sprain your ankle in general.
Yeah.
Now, take that same scenario. You're crossing the street, you sprain your ankle. At the exact same time, you look up and there's a bus about to hit you. Do you think your ankle's going to hurt?
I don't think you'll think twice about it.
You're not going to feel your ankle. Your brain's going
Yeah.
to go, I'm going to shut off that signal because that's not useful to my survival right now. I'm not going to feel pain until I run across the street. And then once the bus is out of the way, is my ankle going to hurt? Probably, right? So your brain has an amazing capacity to turn off pain if it needs to. If it will lead to your survival, it will shut pain off. I mean, we hear that all the time with soldiers in war, who get shot. They don't feel it. They go to save their buddy, whatever it may be, and they don't feel any of that until afterwards. So your brain can shut off pain if it needs to. But if you have just injured something, if you had a fall, let's say, or you got hit by a car, or you've had some traumatic incident, or you just, lifted something that was too heavy and felt a pop and you feel pain, it's obviously quite likely that the pain that you're feeling is because you did injure something in your body, right? Now, if you have a pain that's been around for the last 5 years, that's constant, that never goes away, what is the likelihood that your tissues are being continually damaged for the last 5 years?
Yeah. That's a good
Right?
point.
By definition, a pain that is constant and unwavering is a false signal. You're not constantly being damaged over and over and over again all day, every day, right? Pain is an alarm system that's supposed to alert you when something has been damaged or potentially damaged. The whole point is for you to check your body part and make sure you're okay.
Yeah.
So how many times does something hurt that you check it and you're like, oh no, I didn't hurt anything?
Yeah, like stubbing your toe in the middle of the night or something.
Yeah, exactly. So the what we need to learn to discern is when pain is actually a result of tissue damage versus when it's a false alarm. Mm-hmm. And what happens with people with chronic pain, that's more than 3 months of a specific pain, is that it's the alarm system that's the problem, not the tissues. By 3 months, your tissues have healed to the best of their ability. And even if, let's say, there are certain tissues that don't heal fully in the body, they don't have good circulation, they don't have enough stem cells, and so they don't regenerate like new, right? So bones are a perfect example of a tissue that generally heals very well because it's constantly turning over in your body. So when you break a bone, your bone knows how to turn itself over and create new bone. It's no big deal. You'll be like new, unless it's a super complex fracture. But take ligaments or like a meniscus in the knee, doesn't really have that ability to regenerate. But even if it doesn't regenerate, what happens is that your brain learns to adjust to those signals and tunes them out. The same way that, when you walk into a really loud room, initially you get overwhelmed with all of the sensory input into your ears and you're like, holy crap, it's loud in here. But then if you're in there for 10 minutes, it like starts to dim down to where you can actually have a conversation with someone and you've learned to tune out all that extra information. The same thing happens with an old injury. It's not that, maybe there is something that's still injured in the body, but your brain has accounted for it, because if you think from an evolutionary perspective, let's say caveman Joe tore his meniscus running after, a boar. It's going to hurt when it happens. It's going to heal as much as it can. Our bodies are pretty good at healing and they'll do the best that they can. And whatever hasn't healed, your brain is going to have to learn to tune out, because you still need to go chasing after some wild boar and whatever it is for survival, right? Yeah. So from a survival perspective, it makes sense that your brain has the ability to shut out certain signals when they're no longer constructive for you to keep going in life, right?
Yeah.
So that's the key point, is that understanding that pain and tissue damage are two separate things, specifically in the case of chronic pain.
How does lack of sleep affect pain?
So because pain is produced in the brain, the fact that you get poor sleep or not enough sleep makes your whole nervous system more sensitive. And when you're, generally we know that when you don't sleep a lot, you kind of feel like crap, right? Yeah. And a lot of times if you don't sleep enough, your body feels achy. And it's because your whole nervous system is more sensitive because it's under rested. So it's a lot more easy for your brain to misinterpret signals if you are not well rested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. So, what part of the brain feels pain, and what's going on with like your neurons? Like, is it something where it's just like a neuron firing and it just keeps on going, and that's like sending that signal, like, and what part of the brain is it affecting?
Oh gosh, that's a really complex question. So there is no single pain center in the brain. So there's not a single structure that's responsible for pain.
Yeah, because we could take that shit out of it.
Right. Yeah. You could just inhibit that piece. Yeah. No, it's actually distributed. And this is true of most functions of the brain. It's distributed across many different structures in the brain. And that's why we actually see in people with chronic pain, there are changes in the structure of the brain on MRI.
Okay.
And the other thing is that those brain structures are normally performing other functions. So when a brain is in pain, it doesn't process certain things as well as it normally would, because it's being hijacked by pain. The brain is really busy processing pain. And so they'll have issues with short-term memory, for example. They'll have issues with focus and attention. I mean, if you've ever had pain, you can relate that like it's hard to focus on something when you're in pain. And there's a lot of other changes. There's difficulty coordinating movement. People move in weird ways. Like even if you wanted to move normally, you just can't make your muscles do it. You have changes in the sensory cortex. So pain tends to spread over time because your brain literally can't tell, is that in my finger or is that in my wrist? Like, I can't tell anymore. So there's a lot of changes that occur in the brain that then create different sensations in the body. So for a long time, people with chronic pain would report these sensations, these changes in what they're feeling that didn't agree with Western medicine's idea of what you should be feeling. And they're basically told that they were crazy. Like, well, it's all in your head, right? Like you can't possibly be feeling that. You can't be feeling that. Like, that's not a thing. And it's like, no, there's changes in the brain, and that's why they're feeling those things, So anyways, pain is distributed across many different structures in the brain. And they're a neural network. So there is sort of like a neurotag, they call it, in that whenever you trigger pain, these different areas all light up at the same time. And that's like you said, that's like one of the reasons why you can't just shut it off so easily. And then your brain starts to associate pain with different activities and things and places and events. Right. And so even just going to that place might bring on pain in your brain, because your brain is learning to associate those things together. And the more it associates it, then the more it gets reinforced, right? So as neurons wired together, they wire together, so they get reinforced over time. Yeah. And so that can happen in the brain, which we call the central nervous system, but even in the peripheral system, so in your actual tissues, the little nerve endings that are sitting in the tissues, there can be changes there. So, sometimes the nerve that's sitting in the tissues becomes hypersensitive to where it fires off way too easily. And so there's more information going to the brain about that body part. So there's a lot of changes also at the spinal cord level, because the spinal cord is kind of the middleman between the brain and your peripheral nerves in your tissues. So it's a multifaceted kind of change, and they're plastic. So they're constantly, changing over, which is a good thing because it means we can undo it theoretically. But it does mean that the more it happens also, so it can be reinforced in a good direction or in a bad direction.
Have you ever seen that, it was like the rubber hand. I can't remember what it was called.
Rubber hand experiment. Yeah.
Rubber hand experiment. And that is crazy. So do you want to explain to our listeners what that's all about and what they did?
Oh gosh.
I think that's a pretty good summation of what we're talking about, really.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So you have a subject that's sitting with two hands on the table, and they put a divider so that, let's say, it's hiding your right hand and you can only see your left hand. And then in the place of where your right hand would be, they put this rubber hand. And so you see your left hand and then this rubber hand that looks like it's your right hand. And then your right hand is hidden from view. So your brain is looking at a right hand and a left hand. And then they take a paintbrush and they stroke it over the rubber hand and your hidden hand at the same time, so that your brain is looking at this rubber hand but feeling sensation from your right hand. And so it starts to get confused about that rubber hand actually being your hand, basically. Yeah. So they keep brushing it until you're like, yeah, it feels like the rubber hand is my hand. And my perception is that hand is being touched by this, what's it called? Paintbrush. Yeah. And then, without telling the subjects, which I think is quite neat, maybe they warn them. Yeah. They take is it a hammer?
Yeah, it's a hammer. Yeah.
A hammer, and they hit the glove or the rubber hand with the hammer, and people will experience pain, and they'll obviously freak out and jump, even though it's like this is not even part of their body, but their brain in that moment thinks that is part of their body, and so it will produce pain as if you had been hit with a hammer on your actual hand, which is pretty crazy.
That is crazy. And they've actually done things like this with what do they call the goggles, the virtual reality goggles, where they've like touch people's backs and you'll see like a 3-dimensional version of you in front of you in the goggles. And they'll make you basically have an out-of-body experience, because you'll see on the goggles someone standing in front of you getting their back rubbed.
Weird.
Feel it, and you'll think that the imaginary version in front of you is you.
That's pretty cool.
It sounds kind of trippy, but it's just really interesting how our brains are so flexible. I mean, it's something that like just, man, I mean, I feel like I don't know anything about neuroscience really, but the stuff that I do know, it overwhelms me in thought, just how the smallest little tweak of neurons can really change our perception of reality. And
Totally.
so why don't we talk a little bit about how pain does change your perception of reality and what happens there?
Yeah. Really quickly on the subject of
Sure.
VR. So the same way that you can use it to do all of that, it's being used in chronic pain, because a
Oh,
lot of
really?
times there are things that people can't do in real life, but they can do it in VR
Uh-huh.
potentially. So one really interesting experiment that they did is somebody with chronic neck pain, for example, they turn their head to the right, and at a specific point, that's where their pain starts. Okay. Then they put VR goggles on them, and they manipulate it such that when that person turns their head to the right, the image that they're seeing is that they're moving much less than their head is actually moving. And if you do that, they can turn their head much further before the pain starts,
That is
because
so
their
cool.
visual cortex is telling them they haven't gotten to that point where their pain starts yet.
That's
So in that
amazing.
way, you can trick the body into doing a lot more just by changing the visual input, which is
That's
really
amazing.
awesome. So I think that that's one way in which like technology can facilitate a lot of changes in the brain that we might not be able to otherwise.
Yeah. And that's
Um,
way better than medication.
right, right, yeah. And then going back to the rubber hand experiment, we do something really similar with a mirror. We call it mirror therapy, where if somebody has a painful right hand, you hide the right hand and use a mirror so that they see their left hand and they see the mirror image of their left hand, which looks like a right hand. And we have them move their left hand, pretending that what they're seeing in the mirror is their right hand. And that way they can start to work on changing the map that's in their brain, at least, of what they can do with their bodies. So there's a lot of ways of tricking the brain
Yeah.
into gaining function. And it's pretty fascinating. I mean, mental practice counts, basically, is what it comes down to. They've also done studies with pianists,
I
and
was
they
just
had
going to
half
mention
of
that.
them,
Yeah.
right? So half of them did actual practice and half of
Yeah.
them mental practice. And then they had both groups perform. And
Where, just so we can specify, mental practice is where you just close your eyes and envision that you're playing the piano.
right, exactly. Yeah, you just do a mental
Yeah.
visualization of you playing.
Yeah.
And the performance is the same, whether you've done real practice, quote unquote, real practice versus mental practice. And most athletes know this, because that's what, when your body is run down, you can't do another run. You can do a mental practice, and that counts.
Yeah. Michael Jordan actually was kind of like famous for that with like free free throws. He would
Mm-hmm.
just like do free throws, imaginary free throws, and visualize it and close his eyes, and that was like one of his techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really cool that we're like getting to this point where we're actually starting to realize that this stuff is real. I mean, it's just as
Right.
real as reality in a sense, because reality is just in our the neurochemicals in our brain, right?
Yep. It's basically just your brain's interpretation of what reality is based on all of the inputs from your senses.
Yeah.
And you can close your eyes and imagine a reality, and to your brain it's the same thing as if it was actually happening. It's just a matter of how much detail you're putting into your visualization. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So, well, before we get onto this, I want to ask something that's kind of off the wall, but how has understanding neuroscience affected the way that you perceive like all of this like racism and just things
mm,
in our culture right now, because it's actually had a huge impact on the way I perceive all of that, and I'm wondering
definitely.
if it's changed your perception of that as well.
Yeah, I actually just finished a book that I would highly recommend called Mistakes Were Made But Not by Me. uh,
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down.
it's a great one, which talks about just this built-in blind spot that we have for ourselves. And I could go on about this book, but I won't. But the point is that, I think understanding that our behaviors are driven, and our beliefs are driven by processes that are happening in our brain based off things we were taught, our experiences, our memories, etc. And so the more conscious you can become of your automatic patterns, the more power you have to change them. But most of us are just operating under automation, basically. So it's like all the programming from our childhood, our cultural environment, our societal environment, and then your personal experiences and beliefs on top of that. But we tend to think that it's just us thinking things, like we're totally in control. and we're totally not. Like most
Right.
most of the time we're on autopilot. Like when you
So,
take a shower, are you really paying attention to what you're doing?
right. No, not at all.
Usually not. Like most of the things that you do on a daily basis, you're basically on autopilot, unless you make a conscious effort to think about what you're doing, how you're doing it, what are you actually feeling, and that's why the practice of mindfulness is really helpful in meditation, because it separates you from your thoughts. You realize, oh, thoughts are just a thing that's happening in my brain.
Yeah.
I am separate from my thoughts and I can change them.
So what's your view on free will?
I think we don't really have free will until we have a degree of free will.
Oh, so you're like a Daniel Dennett. Like you think that there's different degrees.
I think there are different degrees of free will. I think a lot of us we think we have free will, but we're just dictated by our like animal brain instincts.
I know.
and just programming. Like,
yeah.
And I think even if you're like a super aware, conscious, whatever you call it, you meditate every day, I think even then we're probably overestimating the amount of control we have over things.
Yeah, I think personally, I mean, I think that almost shows how much free will we don't have, because you just are witnessing all these things arise, just like constantly flowing through you, and you're just like, how the hell did that even come up? Like it's bizarre. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. I want to get back to the pain thing though. Yeah. So, oh shit, I forgot I was going to ask you about that.
Well, I think earlier you were asking, what are the changes in people who have chronic pain in terms of other things that happen.
Yeah, like behavior
patterns and things like that. Yeah. So there's many different things, and the thing about pain, we say, is like pain has an N of 1. Everybody's pain is completely unique because everybody's nervous system is completely unique, and everybody struggles with different things. So you might be somebody who is really expressive about pain depending on your culture. Like some people are really vocal about it, and they maybe are even overly dramatic towards other people to really show their pain. We see that a lot in Latin cultures, for example. So there's a cultural component to pain. Mm-hmm. And then there's
weird. I mean, I would think it'd be opposite for some reason. Well, I don't know why. I mean, I've never really spent much time in Latin cultures, but I would think that the American culture would be like very showy of the pain, and like most others probably wouldn't be. But that's just how I would think. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's the case. Like everything, there's like more research needed, but Latin cultures tend to be more expressive. Sure. So we'll see that more. There's gender differences. It's more common in women than men, for example. Mm-hmm. And women might have a different experience than men. There's this really interesting study actually in relation to gender differences. Yeah. That if you have a female physician, she will be more likely to prescribe opiates to a woman that's presenting with pain than a man presenting with pain. And if you have a male physician, he will be more likely to prescribe opiates to a man with pain than to a woman with pain. Huh. So even not, obviously not consciously, they're not doing that on purpose, right? They don't think that they're treating people differently, but consistently that's what we see, which is pretty interesting. So we think differently about genders and pain as well, right? If it's a man and a woman is judging the man, seeing this man and judging whether or not the pain is intense enough to warrant an opiate, right, they're going to tend to downplay a man's pain, which is kind of crazy. And if it's a male physician, he's going to be like, well, this guy wouldn't be complaining unless he was really in a lot of pain. So it might be like, you know what I mean? Like there's all these assumptions that we make based on all of our own experiences and our beliefs, whatever. So gender is, there are gender differences, there are cultural differences. There's definitely an association between depression and chronic pain. We don't really know which causes which, but there's a lot of overlap in the brain areas that fire up for depression and for pain. So from the brain's perspective, they look a lot alike. There's a strong correlation between anxiety and pain, chronic pain. There's so many other things, but we see changes in the brain that then drive these behaviors and drive these thought processes. So I definitely had anxiety about my pain. And I didn't think I was anxious. Like I'm not somebody who identifies as being anxious, if you will. But it's interesting also how we have this blind spot on ourselves. We can't see the way that we behave until we take a pause and a time out and actually observe your thoughts and realize, oh my God, I'm obsessing about this, Right. So that's where I think the practice of meditation is so helpful, because it forces you to just pay attention to where does your mind go? What are you paying attention to? What are you focusing on? What keeps popping up? So that you can be aware of what your time is spent thinking about. Catastrophic thinking is another pattern that we see in chronic pain. So assuming that the very worst thing that could be happening is what's happening and that it's going to turn out terribly. And as far as behaviors, some people are really stoic. They don't show pain. Pain is invisible, so that's it's one of these invisible illnesses. So some people feel really isolated by that, and they kind of pull away from society. They stop hanging out with friends. They don't want to complain about their pain all the time. So they just go on, pretend it's not there, but they tend to isolate themselves. Other people are really expressive and they want to be validated. So they'll limp a lot, or they'll really move in ways to show other people that they have pain. So everybody reacts differently to it is basically what I'm saying, but there are some overlaying patterns of thinking that are associated with pain. And so the thought is, well, if we can at least change the thinking, then we can take away from some of the suffering. Because if we think of pain, on the 0 to 10 scale that is used in the healthcare system, like how bad is your pain? On a 0 to 10 scale, pick a number. Most people with chronic pain are like, I hate the scale. I don't know how I could possibly put a number on it, but if I had to put a number on it, it's going to be like a 12. Right. and then the provider laughs at them and is like, yeah, well, that can't be at 12 because you're not screaming and dying right now. What they fail to understand is that there's the pain intensity, and then there's all of the emotional baggage and the frustration and the way that it's impacting their life and the way that they feel like they can't connect with people around them and all of these other things that surround the pain. So what they're really, when they say 12 out of 10, that's their suffering. It's not their physical pain. It's everything that surrounds that. And so we really shouldn't be belittling people or telling them that their pain isn't a 12 just because you're not writhing in agony on the floor. That's not what that really means. If somebody tells you they have a 12 out of 10, well, you should really be listening because this person is suffering. Yeah. I keep getting off onto tangents in this conversation. No, it's
okay. That's how conversations go. If conversations were always so perfect, then they'd be really boring.
I guess so.
Well, so with we kind of were talking a little bit before we started, and I was saying that I feel like I'm kind of like the kind of person that doesn't really show pain. I basically, like with my Crohn's thing, it was like I didn't do anything until I was in the hospital, and that, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I've been with most things in my life. Is just unless I'm in the hospital dying, I'm not gonna say or think much about it.
Yeah.
So what is that? Like, why do you think that someone like me versus someone like, I have a family member who is always, that she goes to the doctor for a headache,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's pros and cons to each way of dealing with pain. So the people who tend to ignore the pain and push through the pain will often drive themselves to exhaustion or to a point to where they have these terrible flare-ups that are really much harder to control. So it's not always a good thing to just
I know. I totally feel like I definitely don't think that my way of doing things is any better,
Right.
Like you're saying with exhaustion, like, I mean, I will like literally run myself until I'm in the ground, and it's like, I'm sure I'll die way younger because of it. I know I'm going to. Like, I shouldn't be that negative, but it's like, I used to always tell people would be like, man, you need to just like learn how to relax and rest and whatever, or else you're going to die. And I was like, well, at least I'll like live a lot before I die, I'll get a lot done before I die. So
yeah. And hopefully there's a healthy balance somewhere in between those two extremes, like we said, that the other extreme is to overinterpret every little thing that's going on in your body and to get treatment for things that are really just like minor things that you don't really necessarily need to go to a doctor about. Right. So there's the two extremes.
Pill closet or whatever they're called, the medicine cabinet, and there's just like, more medicine in there than a pharmacy.
Yeah.
That's scary.
I think that what I would suggest to people is that you want to feel like you can manage your whatever your problem is, whatever the physical symptoms are.
Yeah.
You should feel like you can identify the things that make it worse, the things that make it better, and that you have sort of a plan of action of how you're going to take care of yourself. And then you have the hard part, which is that you have to actually do it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people spend time thinking about all these things, but they don't actually take action.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, especially like exercise and diet. I mean, that's got to, for pain too, that's got to be a huge thing, especially
Definitely.
chronic pain. Like, if I don't eat really clean in a very specific way, I am noticeably different. Like I can noticeably, I feel less energetic. I feel noticeably different. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and Kendra, she works at a natural food store, and a lot of people that go in there, are always like, I want to feel better. What pill can I take to feel better? And it's like, well, you need to, in order to do that, you need to do this, 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 and this. Well, I think I'll just do this. And it's
right. So that's the cultural, that's what we've been taught. Like that's
right.
Society and our culture telling us like, oh, there's a pill for that. That's what we've been told from the start. And that's not really the case. I mean, I think my goal always is to get people empowered to take care of themselves so that nobody should be reliant on me to make them feel better.
Right.
Like I'm just teaching you how to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
That's what I do with people basically, and I think that when you can't self-manage, when you've tried everything that you can do based on what and you know your body better than anybody else is ever going to know it. So if anybody's going to know it, it better be you. So you should really be tuning in. When you can't self-manage, that's when you should go get professional help. When you've tried a few different things and it's still not working out for you, that's when you should go see a healthcare provider, because that's when you want to make sure there isn't something else going on. But I don't think it should be the first line of defense. I think people should be way more in tune with their bodies, and they should be practicing, figuring out, what does my body want? What is going to change this situation for me? And it takes some self-discipline to do that, and I think that's part of the hard part of it.
So how do things like tobacco and alcohol and food and things like that affect pain receptors?
I don't have a scientific answer for you in the sense that I don't know about pain receptors. There technically are not pain receptors per se, but there's sensory receptors. Basically, you have
sensory receptors. Then
different things can increase your sensitivity. So inflammatory foods theoretically can cause your whole nervous system to be more sensitive.
So is that just because it takes more energy to like break it down, and you're not your brain isn't utilizing the energy for necessary things? So like kind of like lack of sleep, I guess. Lack of sleep.
I don't know enough about nutrition to really be able to answer that question.
Okay.
So I don't want to say the wrong things, but there's inflammatory markers in your body that can be elevated, and that can be affected by diet as well as many other things. Yeah. But one of the examples that's pretty clear is like when you have the flu, you hurt everywhere. Your whole body is really sensitive. So we know that immunity is definitely linked to pain sensitivity. When you're fighting something off, you're more sensitive. Your immune system raises the alarm. So your alarm system.
Do you think that has to do with like your energy, not like, or like, what do you think that is though?
I think that's the nervous system ramping up, right? Because basically if your body's fighting something off, there's an attack. And so your body's like looking out for threat. So then if there's any kind of little tissue information, it's like, is that a threat? Is that a threat? Is that a threat?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the sensitivity that accompanies that.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, damn, I feel like I've learned a lot so far.
Great. I feel like I'm just rambling, but if you feel like you're learning, great.
Yeah, your rambling is my education.
No.
So how has this affected like your life and your perception of others and things like that? Because I'm sure how does it affect your relationships even? I mean, does it make you analyze things differently?
Yeah, well, I think it's just I feel like I really truly believe, because of firsthand experience and because the science is now backing it up, that the mind and the body are completely connected, and therefore we should be helping people with both. That we can't just like it really highlights mental health and the need for services for mental health. And that also that you shouldn't, the same way that like you shouldn't wait to be about to die, like you were saying, to like go
Yeah.
into the hospital before doing something about it. We shouldn't be waiting for people to be like halfway down the hole before they go see somebody for their mental health, and just being way more proactive about that and building some awareness around it. And I think the way that it has changed the way I see things is that I try to look at the whole person. Like, I'm not just going to look at a body part. I'm going to say there's a body part within a body, within a brain, within a society, within a bunch of relationships. And we have to look at the whole picture if we really want to understand why this is happening, and not discounting what people tell you. Like, that's a big piece of it too, is like, if somebody, sometimes people will be hyperbolic, right? And so you're like, oh, it's just being, they're just being dramatic or something. It's like, no, that's their experience. That's what they're feeling right now. Maybe that sounds extreme to you, but in their brain, that's what they're feeling. And so it's okay to validate whatever somebody tells you, whatever they're going through, like, just validate it. It costs you nothing, and they're probably not lying to you.
Right. So
I
have a weird question. What about like woo-woo characters that, they're like if you have cancer attacking your body, you can heal it with your thoughts or something. Like, what about that? I mean, because what you're kind of saying is that we have a whole lot more control over our bodies than we think we do, which is obviously, I agree with you, and that's apparent.
Right.
But that seems like we can have a what the bleep moments
Totally.
after talking about it like this.
It goes back to the fact that it's not black and white. So understanding that whatever you're feeling is partly what's happening in your body, and it's partly the way that your brain is interpreting what's happening in your body. And so let's say that, your illness is 70% physical, 30% your brain misinterpreting things. Just by thinking about the mental component of things and looking at your thought patterns and all of that interaction, you can get 30% relief. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you do that without any drugs, without any invasive procedures, without any of that, right? So it's like there's no downside to adding that other layer of like looking at the mind and the way it's interacting with the body. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a component of it that's happening in the body. I think people tend to seesaw like way too far to the left or the right on this. Yeah. Or it's like, it's all in the body. And it's like, no, it's not all in the body. We know that for a fact, but it's also not all in the brain. Like, if you have cancer, there's a lot more going on in your body than just you thinking you have cancer. Like, let's not discount it. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it's melding of the two things that I think is going to lead to better care and therefore better health, rather than, going to two extremes. But I think that we tend to underestimate how much our thinking can affect things, because the brain is the controller for the body, literally. Like, all of your hormone systems, everything is driven from up here. So potentially, could you create an environment that is more conducive to healing by thinking a specific way? I think definitely yes. And I see it all the time, because people who think they're going to get better, get better. And those who don't think they're going to get better don't tend to get better.
And that's why we have, right? Yeah, that's why we have placebo tests. I mean, like, that's what a placebo is, right? It's like, we have placebo control groups because we know for sure a certain percentage of people are going to think they're way better, Yeah.
And I think sometimes like placebo is almost seen as a negative thing sometimes. Like, it's like, oh, placebo is just taking something that doesn't actually do anything, and it just goes to show that it's like some piece of it is in your head. And I would say what a placebo does is it calms your nervous system, because you feel like you're being proactive and you're taking something that's healing you, and you have less worry, less stress, less anxiety. Therefore, you feel better. Maybe you sleep better. Maybe there's other things that, help to heal your body attached to that. And it's just making use of the brain's ability to modulate your experience by making you think you're taking something that is actually doing something physically to your body. So it's like, I don't think we need to discount the placebo effect. It's a totally valid effect. Like, it's just your brain changing the way it sees the problem, and therefore you feel better.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's fine.
When I was in high school, this is kind of a fucked up story, but when I was in high school, I like was really into bodybuilding, and I had a friend that wanted to get into bodybuilding with me, and but he wanted to do steroids like right off the bat, and that's really bad for you if you just do it like right out the gate, because you can see so much progress without it, and so he kept on asking me. Finally, I was like, okay, I'll give you some. So I like went and got him some placebo pills and gave him placebo pills. And he saw like these huge gains in the gym, thought he had roid rage, and like his personality changed, and then at the end of it, I finally told him, I was like, dude, I was giving you placebo pills the whole time, and he was like really pissed at me, but I thought it was awesome. Cause I'm like, dude, it gave you the mental motivation to slay it in the gym, and he killed it. Like he had all this crazy progress, and that was kind of like one of the first times where I realized how much of it can be in the brain,
Totally. It's like, I love that story because it just shows so clearly that your mental state really determines how you're going to do. Yeah. So your beliefs are really, really pertinent when it comes to recovering from any illness or injury. It's important to address that side of things because your brain is an active component.
Yeah.
It's not a passive component.
Yeah. Another interesting thing just from my personal experience, like when I had a really bad Crohn's flare, like a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than a year ago, it was starting to happen. I knew it was starting to happen because I started having all the early signs, which I can always tell when I'm going to have one. And then I just was like, well, fuck it, kind of. And then I started to eat worse and not not take care of myself. I was eating, sugar and all these bad things. And then it just went way, 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 way out of hand. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I continued to do that. And I continued to push myself over the edge because it was like an all or nothing, type of look at it. And then finally there was actually that guy, Chris Kresser. I read his book, but finally I read this book that I was like, what am I doing? And I did this reset and I had this whole different outlook on health. And I started to, I did a reset diet where I just completely just cut everything. And I was mentally motivated to be the best version of myself I could. And it was gone within a month, completely gone. And this was with no medication, and the doctors were trying to push me onto medication, they're trying to push me onto biologics. And I had spent $8,000 going to the doctor for them just to basically tell me you need to start this medicine. And I'm saying I'm not going to, because I don't know if you know what a biologic is, but there's a lot of negative effects that it can have. It becomes a part of your immune system. It's it becomes like a part of your body. So if you quit taking it, your body starts to lack something. And so you basically have to take it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I was just it was too scary, I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But so anyways, so the moral of the story is, though, it was this really weird thing where it's when you've been fooled by something and then all of a sudden you see reality and you see it from a whole different perception, and your outlook on something is literally different. And you're just like, how did I ever see the world that way? How did I ever see health that way? And I'm sure it's the same for you. You were probably experiencing that neck pain, and then all of a sudden you read that book that you're talking about, and then you have this whole different perception. You're like, I can't even imagine going back to thinking that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it's funny because I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm like, when is it going to come back?
Right.
What am I going to do then? I in a way, I'm interested because I want to find out, how am I going to handle that? Am I going to let the fear take over?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens is once you get scared, then you go right into your fight or flight and you go revert back to whatever your reactions are. Yeah. But if you can be no, I'm okay. This is just a flare up. It's fine. It'll go away, and not stress out over it. It goes away. The less I stress about it, the more I'll tweak it, move it wrong for a second. I'll be like, oh no, I moved it wrong. And I just keep moving, and I'm like, oh, go on with my day. It doesn't stick around, But if I were to think about it obsessively and keep checking in on it, and I was worried that it wasn't going to go away, then I'm paying attention to it all the time, and I'm way more likely to continue to feel it. So I just think right now we're really underestimating the contributions of the brain and therefore our thinking patterns on our symptoms. We assume that our symptoms are purely physical, and we discount the idea that some component of that experience is also the way that your brain is interpreting things.
So why do you think in Western, because I think this has a lot to do with Western culture, but I'm sure there's, I mean, other cultures that just don't understand any of it. But why do you think that we have that disassociation, like that disconnect between the brain and the body like that? Like, do you think that it's because people view their mind as like this soul entity, that's not like, we're not just our physical beings, or what do you think
Yeah.
it is like?
I think it just comes from our understanding of anatomy, kind of. I mean, we started with looking at the body,
Huh.
it's much harder to, like, if you dissect a human body, you can see all the components, but if you dissect a human brain, it's much harder to tell what anything
Right.
does, or like how
Yeah.
it works or any of that. So it's just this, it's the next frontier for medicine, really, I think,
Huh.
is understanding the human brain and how it functions and what the effect it has on the body,
Yeah.
and how it interacts with the body. And so I think we just started from one angle, and so we got stuck in that rut. And then now it's like, oh wait, there's this other whole thing that we now have to like add in there that we've
Yeah.
completely ignored this whole time. But I don't know. I don't have a great explanation for why it turned out that way. I mean, I think you're totally right that it's a Western mindset. I think Eastern medicine looks at things very differently,
Yeah.
much more holistic. I mean, I will say often that like Western medicine is for emergent situations. Like if you're dying, you need to Western medicine for sure. Like if you like majorly injured something, you broke some bones, like go for it. But for more chronic, low grade things, chronic symptoms, I think Eastern medicine does a better job
Hmm.
because they're more interested in looking at people holistically and understanding the root causes of things.
Yeah.
So I hope that healthcare continues to move in the direction of integrating the two. So I
Yeah.
think we'll serve people much better that way.
Yeah. I mean, and like, it's kind of funny because I hope that we continue to explore the brain for like criminal justice reasons
Yeah.
and I'm obsessed with the behavior side of it, so
Mm-hmm.
it's like the, it, it's just really weird. Like in Western culture, I don't know if it's because of religion or what it's because of, like the echoes of religion or the Puritans or whatever, but it's like this idea that each individual has their own individuality.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's like evil people when
Right.
really it's just some people have different like pedophilia is a good example. Like pedophiles, that's like, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination excusing the behavior, but it's like we need to figure out what's going on there in the brain,
Mm-hmm.
why they have those weird desires that are not socially acceptable, so that we can fix it. Otherwise we're just burying our head in the sand and just prosecuting people. And I just think that this and behavioral studies and,
Uh-oh.
did I lose you? Did I lose you? You there?
It's cutting out a little bit.
Yeah.
I can hear you, but it's breaking up a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
That
yeah, I
happens.
mean, I think there's a new field that's emerging called behavioral health, which I think is going to be sort of the future of understanding all of that. And yeah, I agree. It goes back to your idea of like how much sovereignty do you really have in your life? And I think we're a lot of automated patterns that fire off in our brain most of the time. So is that person really responsible for what they did?
Right.
Like
And I
so
mean,
much.
sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, it's just it's hard to tease it out, and
Yeah.
I don't think we can know that right now.
Yeah.
I think we need a lot more research and understanding of the brain before we can understand any of it. And I
Mhm.
think for the most part, people are operating on automated systems, and therefore, in some ways, can't really be individually accountable for what's
Yeah.
happening,
I know.
which
I know
is kind of crazy. But
it is. It's totally crazy, and it sucks because people want revenge or justice, as it's called,
right.
right? Because same thing basically. But people want revenge so bad that they're willing to throw out this conversation completely because they don't want to deal with that. Like looking at that person as a person, they want to like subjugate them and make them, oh, they're evil, they need to go in a cage or be put to death or whatever, when
Mm-hmm.
and I, as a rational person who like totally like am obsessed with behavioral biology and like, this is something that I really care about understanding. I don't like it either. I think that,
Right.
like, for example, with pedophiles, like, I think that they should, like, be either studied or taken out of society, and or studied while they're being taken out. You know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah.
That's like, we need to. I think that we need to understand it. But until we do, they can't be amongst us. Like, it's not safe for children or whatever. So it's like this really weird thing that even I don't know the right approach. And I think that the approach is so daunting for people that they are just like not even willing to go in that direction. And I'm sure it's like that for the medical profession with like what you're in too, or the medical profession with like diet,
Right.
like, oh my gosh, this is a whole new frontier. If we go into that frontier, then we need to relearn everything.
Well, and you can't throw a pill or a surgery or anything at that. Like, it's way more complex to deal with.
Right.
Like, you have to sit with that person and like let them talk a lot, and like it's just a completely different ball game.
Yeah.
And that's where I think mental health needs to come in, and like we need to build that side of things, because that's where you can get people to change their patterns, is by building conscious awareness of what they are in the first place, and then figuring out why you're doing that and seeing if you can change it. You should definitely read that book I talked about earlier, because
I wrote down.
Really, really into it.
Who's it by?
It's 2 authors, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but I can send it to you later.
Have you ever read any of Daniel Kahneman?
No.
Do you know who he is?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you would love him too. He was.
You'll send me some titles after.
yeah. Just because it has a lot to do with what you're talking about. Just it has. I mean, he's once again more on the behavior side of things, but just how he like actually won a Nobel Prize for type 1, type 2 distinctions in personalities, which type 1 is like the underwriting, like the autonomous, what you're talking about. And then type 2 is like where we're kind of conscious of that part of that, and so it's a really interesting guy. But, well, I have talked to you for like an hour and a half, so I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but are you practicing in that area right now? Is there, like, if someone's in your area, which isn't disclosed yet? But,
yeah. I'm in San Francisco, California. And yes, I work at a practice called Presidio Sport and Medicine here. So if you have body issues that you want some help with, then come see me. And it's not, again, it's not black and white. It's not to say, like, for example, we'll take my neck. There's something wrong in my neck for sure. Like, there's something happened. I'm not saying it's all in my head.
Yeah.
But the amount of attention that I put on it literally dictates how much I feel it. So if I just put my attention elsewhere and I don't worry and stress out about it, I really don't feel it. Yeah. And that's what matters, is that people can get relief even if their body isn't perfect. Even if stuff breaks down, you can still get out of pain, or at least have a significant improvement just by noticing the way that your brain is interacting with that pain. Yeah. So, if people are curious or if they need some help, then reach out to me and I'm happy to do what I can.
Yeah, I really value that distinction too, because I think that because people are so black and white, someone could totally listen to this and just take away that, yes. Oh, it's all in my head. I guess I'll just, or they could think that we're like, I mean, I for one second don't think that you think this way, but people could come away from it saying like, oh, they don't think that pain is real,
Right.
And it's not, like, just to be clear, that's not at all what you're saying. It's not.
No.
So
no, in fact, I say all the time, your pain is 100% real. It's 100% real always. Whatever you feel is truly happening. It just might not be all in your body the way that you think. That's the only distinction, is that it's a more complicated picture than we were initially told, which is that something broke in your body and that's why it hurts. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, damn, it's so good talking to you, Amber.
It's fun.
Yeah. Let me stop this thing. And do you have like any social media pages or anything, Twitter or anything? Yeah.
The only thing I would share actually is I started an Instagram as a way of kind of talking about the body, the brain, pain science, anything. And it's Amber Richard DPT.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I do little lives and like talk about different things around pain. And if people have questions about injuries or whatever, they can just let me know there and I'll address them.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to hit pause on this thing. Just hang out with me for a sec.